Okay, so today is all about cell differentiation. Okay, so yesterday, or in the previous lesson, we learned about mitosis and how the cells reproduce. And when we were learning about mitosis and how the cells reproduce, we learned that it's not a mommy cell and a daddy cell get together and make a baby cell. It is one mommy cell splits in half, and each half becomes what we call a daughter cell. And these daughter cells are clones of the mommy cell. Okay. So one cell splits in half into two separate cells, and those two cells are identical. So here's why cell differentiation is important. Because if you think about it, you start off as just one cell. Okay. So in the very beginning, um, you are just one cell big. After the sperm from dad combines with the egg from mom, this creates the very first cell that will eventually become you. Now, that cell is called a zygote, Z-Y-G-O-T-E. Okay. And all of the cells that are currently in your body right now came from that one cell. But as we learned in mitosis, when cells reproduce, they just make clones of themselves. So if the only way that cells multiply is by making a clone of themselves, then how come we aren't just a bunch of zygotes, a bunch of zygote cells? Because that's where we came from. We started off as one cell that was the zygote right here, once the sperm and egg combine. So if that cell were to reproduce, it would just be cloning itself, right? And so we'd have two zygote cells, and then those two would turn into four zygote cells, and we'd all just be a bunch of zygote cells, right? And all of our cells would be identical to each other, but they're not. We have all kinds of different cells. We have hair cells, we have eye cells, heart, lung, brain, stomach, skin. We have so many different kinds of cells that have to come together to make up our entire being. So what happens? How do we go from being just one type of cell to all the different kinds of cells that exist in our bodies today? Well, that's where cell differentiation comes in. And that's what we are talking about today. So all cells have a full set of the same DNA. Every single cell in your body, whether it's a hair cell, a brain cell, a nerve cell, all cells in your entire body, they all have the same exact DNA inside of them. Every cell has a full set of DNA inside of it, and it's all the same. So why are all cells not exactly the same? Again, it's because of this thing called differentiation. Now, what is differentiation? Well, at some point in the development, after the sperm and egg combine to make that first cell called a zygote, that is what you are when you're one cell big. That cell will split in half into two cells, and those two will split in half into four cells, and four into eight. And around that time, when you're about 8 cells big, and those 8 cells split in half into 16, somewhere around that time, cells start to differentiate. In other words, they start to become different. So one cell may turn into a brain cell, the other cell may turn into a heart cell, the other cell may turn into a skin cell, a nerve cell. And all these cells will start to become different things. So let's explain how that happens. First, you need to know a few things. You need to know that a full set of DNA is 46 chromosomes. Okay? We learned this yesterday when we were talking about mitosis as well in cell reproduction. So the 46 chromosomes all together are your DNA. Your DNA is not one long continuous strand. You might think it's just one long piece, but it's actually not. It's actually broken up into 46 chunks. and each chunk is called a chromosome. And chromosomes are actually made up of many smaller segments that are called genes. So, um, and each gene controls a different trait. So, in other words, of your DNA, every single cell in your body has all the DNA and it has all the genes. However, only a few of those genes are turned on. So even though your brain cell may have all the genes that tell it how to become anything. It has heart cell genes, it has hair cell genes, it has nerve cell genes. It has all these genes. But because it's a brain cell, the only genes that are actually turned on are the ones that tell it how to be a brain cell. And the rest of the genes are left off. They do not get expressed. Same is true in your heart cells. Your heart cells, they have all the DNA and all of the genes that tell it how to be a brain cell or a lung cell or a skin cell or a bone cell. But that cell only turns on the genes that tell it how to be a heart cell. And that's why it is a heart cell, is because those genes are turned on and the other ones are not. So what makes the difference between one cell and the other is which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off. And remember, a gene is just a short segment of DNA. So if we look at this closer, we see that we have a cell. And inside the cell is a nucleus, and inside the nucleus are these chromosomes. Chromosomes, again, are just the chunks of DNA. DNA is not one long piece. It's broken up into 46 chunks we call chromosomes. But if you zoom in on the chromosome, you zoom in really, really close, you'll see the actual double helix structure of the DNA. And when you're looking at the double helix structure of the DNA, a segment of that double helix, maybe in this case from between here and here, is gene 1. And then between here and here is gene 2. And between here and here is gene 3, and so on and so forth. There could be thousands of genes in this chromosome. But again, not all of them are turned on. Some are turned on and some are left off. And depending on which ones are turned on, will determine what type of cell that cell turns into. So let's say that gene 1 controls this protein. Remember protein synthesis. In protein synthesis, DNA is read and it is rewritten into mRNA. And then mRNA copies the instructions from the DNA and it takes it to the ribosomes where the amino acids are put together to make up proteins. And those proteins are what actually control your traits. Okay. So depending on what DNA is turned on or what genes are turned on will determine which type of proteins eventually get made. If gene 1 is turned on, then the protein that gene 1 tells your body to make will be made. But if it's turned off or if it's left off, that protein will not get made. And if that protein does not get made, then that trait will not get expressed. Okay. So, in summary, your DNA controls your traits, yes, but difference, and even though all cells have the same exact DNA inside of them, different cells choose to turn on certain genes that tell it how to be that specific kind of cell. And when those specific genes are turned on, Those genes will tell your body to make those specific proteins that help that cell to become the type of cell that it needs to become, a heart cell or a brain cell or a skin cell. And that's how we go from having the very first cell that will eventually become you before you're born into all the different kinds of cells that will eventually make up your body. And by the way, cells that have not yet been told what type of cell they're going to become, or they have not yet determined what type of cell that they're going to be, they could still be any type of cell. So before the cell is told, because it has all the DNA and that will tell it how to become any kind of cell, it hasn't yet chosen which sections of that DNA that it's going to turn on that determines what type of cell it's going to be. So it could still technically become any kind of cell because it hasn't yet chosen which one it's going to become. And those cells are called stem cells. Stem cells are cells that can still have the ability to become any other type of body cell. If you catch a cell young enough in its development, then you can dictate what type of cell it ends up becoming. Scientists can actually go in to a stem cell and they can manually activate certain genes, turn some genes on, and leave other genes off. So to be able to choose what type of cell that stem cell eventually turns into. It's very interesting. I suggest you look up stem cell research, and they can actually treat cancer with stem cells. And we're going to talk about cancer next time. But that's it for today on cell differentiation.